Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. We're going to start off by discussing the United States as well as Donald Trump's powers as he sees them and as actually allowed within the U.S. Constitution and American law. Trump has threatened to do what no U.S. president has really done before him, at least with the track record that we have so far. He's threatened to unilaterally adjourn Congress, and all of this goes back to the nominees that he's put forth for Congress and Senate to approve for the respective positions that he has nominated them from. Now, he's said that this will hurt, in part, also the fight against coronavirus within the United States. But this also goes back to just how Donald Trump has acted vis-a-vis the U.S. establishment and his continuing battle over nominations. Has he, though, been treated unfairly by Democrats who control the House of Representatives, as we well know? Is this something that is unprecedented vis-a-vis how the Democrats have been playing hardball when it comes to Trump nominations so far for respective positions, as I said, that he's nominated those sorts of people for? In Article 2 of Section 3 of the Constitution, the President of the United States does have the power to, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses or either of them. And in case of disagreement, I'm quoting exactly around, with respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper, end quote. Let's discuss all of those issues a bit further with our guests who are joining us now. We're joined now by Donald A. Dvatz, who is the director of the Jeff Blige Center for the U.S. Alliance in Digital Technology, Security, and Governance. He's also professor of American Studies and Politics at Flinders University. He's also visiting research professor at the University of Virginia. He's currently joining us from Adelaide in Australia. Joining us from New York is Vincent Vernuccio, who is the president of the American Analysis of News and Media Incorporated. He served previously in executive capacities in both Democrat and Republican administrations. Frank, good morning to you, and Donald, good evening to you, and thank you both for joining us. Donald, let me start with you. How unprecedented would it be if Donald Trump would be allowed to adjourn Congress?
Well, I think it would be totally unprecedented, and it wouldn't follow what the Constitution says. Neither the House nor the Senate wishes to adjourn, and that's the only circumstance in which the Constitution says there's such a capacity. So I think this is a bit of a beat-up, really, I think there's no capacity for President Trump to do this. No one has ever done it, and the circumstances that are present today are not those that would be facilitated by the Constitution. So I think it's a non-starter.
Frank, what are your thoughts on that? The argument is in some quarters that even if he's not allowed to go this far, that he has a right to be frustrated with the fact that many of his nominees have been rejected.
It is the type of situation that makes lawyers wealthy. Certainly, the president is dealing with an unprecedented situation. No one in his position has ever exercised this power before. However, it is true that Article 2, Section 3 of the United States Constitution does give him the authority to do this in extraordinary situations. Certainly, the crisis facing both the world and the United States is extraordinary, the COVID-19 crisis.
Indeed. So in this context then, Donald, and with the context of how Donald Trump feels about a Congress, especially in the House of Representatives specifically, as controlled by the Democrats and the way they've treated his nominees, do you think that there is room to at least give him an understanding of, try to come to terms with the fact that this is a president who's feeling very frustrated?
Well, part of the design of the U.S. Constitution is to frustrate presidents. I mean, that was sort of why it was put there, to make life difficult for executives. I think the constitutional framework, the institutions have held up pretty well. Donald Trump is aware of that. I'm sure he's deeply frustrated, probably looking for almost any excuse to find a way around the obstructions and the frustrations that he feels, but this ain't one of them, and it won't work. He will lose he was doing quite well. His popularity was rising. It was almost getting above his unpopularity, so it was kind of a net positive. Those figures have declined in the last few days. Something like this, which is a constitutional challenge that Americans actually kind of believe in, is not going to help those. And he needs to come out of this crisis, and it is a real crisis. And I think no one should underestimate how serious it is, certainly in certain parts of the U.S. So it is real. I mean, large numbers of people have died. Businesses are suffering a great deal. So yes, it is a crisis. Does it compare to the Great Depression? No. Does it compare to World War II? No. Does it compare to the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis? No. So yes, it's a serious time. It's a serious matter. He's frustrated. That's part of the object of the game. And he needs to come out of this looking good. And the way to not look good coming out of this is to end up in yet another battle, which he will lose.
All right, so Frank, in a sense, do you think that Democrats may also be overplaying their power, or the fact that they control the House of Representatives? The argument is that during these 2 years that Trump has so far put forth nominees, there have been 128 cloture votes in comparison to 12 during the same time for President Obama at that time, and 4 during the same time for President George W. Bush. That's according to Senate data. 128 versus just 12 and 4. That's hugely different margins, isn't it? Do you think that Donald Trump has been treated unfairly, possibly by even Senate Republicans?
Well, let me modify one thing the professor did say. The Constitution is not there to limit the powers of the president. It's limit the powers of all 3 branches of government. The genius of the American Constitution is that no one branch can use its powers to the exclusion of the other 2. The point here is that the president feels, rightly or wrongly, that Congress has been moving to limit his powers to an unconstitutional degree. In terms of the way this president has been treated, let's be blunt. It's not just Senate Democrats that have attempted to limit his power. It's also much of the leadership of the Republican Party. Donald Trump is a very different type of president. He has never been in politics before he became president of the United States. He doesn't have the alliances and the deep history that all other politicians have had on assuming the office of the presidency.
So then, Donald, this is just down to the fact that, as Frank there alluded, that we have a man right now at the White House in an office who hasn't been part of the political structure, so doesn't know how all of the above works, and thus it's easy for him to get frustrated with all of the above. And also, as Frank alluded, he doesn't have those alliances. He doesn't have that sort of loyalty in either party, really, for anyone to just give him a break.
Well, that's true. It is true that he had no political experience before becoming president. That's always a dangerous situation. But he's been there for 3 years. He's confronted the opposition since the 2018 election. For the first 2 years, of course, he had more or less his own way with Republican majorities. Now he doesn't have that. But he's had a year and a bit to learn this, and he should have done better building alliances. I think his style is one of sort of ambit claims, to make an extreme statement and then get everybody's attention. That gets considered to be the worst case, and then some kind of compromise is reached, and it isn't quite as bad as all that. And he may get some of what he wants. But certainly it is true that the Democrats and some Republicans have not been pleased with what he wants to do with various appointments. But that is part of the process. And just because you're opposed to it and you have been frustrated by it doesn't mean that you can do an end run around the institutions of the U.S. government. And that is a kind of a fundamental bedrock on which the whole structure rests. And in a serious situation, it's actually not the time to shake the structure. It just increases the uncertainty and the risk. If one wants to really drive the stock market down, which I don't think Donald Trump does, But if you really want to create financial uncertainty, you create political uncertainty, and that would really be not a smart move by anybody's standards. I think this kind of extreme ambit claim isn't really very helpful. It distracts from the quite good run that I think Donald Trump has had, slowly getting grasp of the coronavirus and probably making some positive steps forward. Some states think they're going to start reopening their economies, which will be good for the national economy. Whether or not that proves to be successful or not, we don't know. But there's a positive set of goals that he can set and meet, and come out of this looking like it was a victory rather than a defeat. And as I say, rattling the constitutional structure is not the way to give confidence to either the people or the financial institutions of the country.
Indeed. All right, so Frank, tell me what you think about the fact that, right now we have Donald Trump in office and he's trying to handle this entire COVID-19 pandemic within U.S. borders, of course. He's trying to seemingly take this seriously now, even though early on it can be argued he didn't take this as seriously as he should have. Do you think the Democrats and Republicans can both, in a bipartisan fashion, get behind his efforts now?
Well, one political area, I think that Americans actually voted in large numbers for a shakeup of the institutions. On the right, of course, Donald Trump within the Republican Party, and on the left, Bernie Sanders within the Democratic Party. In terms of taking this crisis seriously, it can be reasonably argued the reverse, that Donald Trump in January, when he imposed a travel ban on China, was taking this far more seriously than the Democrats, who accused him at that time of being a racist and being xenophobic. They opposed the original travel ban on China. The president, I think, can take hold of this situation. The question really is how much damage can be done to the American economy, even in the name of helping stop the crisis, stop the infections, before the cure becomes worse than the disease. The president is eager to open up the economy at this point, particularly in areas of the United States, a very large country, that are not feeling the effects as bad as some others. Certainly what is going on in a small, less populated, less densely populated area, such as the Midwest, is not the same type of solution that one would see perhaps in Chicago or New York City. Yeah. So there are different solutions for different parts of the country, which is what the president has been talking about in his press conferences.
Indeed, Donald, that's an important point, isn't it? Because I feel like, sometimes the president gets a lot of negative publicity, right? Especially from certain media outlets who may be more Democrat-leaning. Do you think that he is right that there needs to be a balance, right, between the economy as well as how to deal with the lockdown? I mean, I imagine that's the challenge every country is dealing with, even where you are right now in Australia.
I think that's right. It's a real set of very difficult choices, and President Trump has said that the opening of the U.S. economy would be one of the most important set of decisions, not one decision, but many decisions that he will make. And I think it's true that President Trump was quick to identify China as the source of this problem and not cooperating initially. The WHO went out of its way not to condemn China in any way for its treatment and publicity about the virus that started there, the second one to start within China and infect the world. So, I think he has done some things quite right and forthrightly. And I think he began to say quite early that the economy had to be opened up or the cure would be worse than the disease. That provoked, of course, outrage from predictable sources. But gradually, the media is coming around to that view. That is the media, which is largely most of the media, which is opposed to Donald Trump, to say, yes, that in fact does have to happen, and we must begin to open the economy. I think once again, Trump began by saying, I'm going to do it. It's my choice. I will tell states when to do that. Everybody pushed back and said, of course, you can't do that. So we have the same issue in some ways of overreach with which we began. Yeah. But people began to say, yes, indeed, we have to consider this, or we will sink the economy. And at what price do we want to sink the whole economy of this country and the largest economy in the world? So it's not just the American circumstance which is at stake in this. It really is the world circumstance.
Indeed.
It's important that the U.S. economy does recover and that this is done in a controlled, careful way. And it does seem to me that the U.S. is beginning to be on exactly that course. And if Donald Trump can maintain that, then this will come out quite well for the country. Okay. Even though the cost of this virus has been very high, and it will also come out quite well for him. So I think we shouldn't jump on odd bits to condemn the whole when the whole is actually beginning to shape up perhaps not so bad.
All right. Well, we'll leave there as a word as the clock has gotten the best of us, but we appreciate both Donald and Frank for their time this evening and morning, respectively. Both of them gave us, of course, the context that we need to understand, of course, Donald Trump and his understanding and knowledge of the U.S. Constitution. He cannot, as he would possibly like to, just adjourn Congress and force through the people that he has appointed, his nominees, essentially, for respective positions, which he said, if they do not get through, that would hurt the fight against coronavirus within the country and other such respective important factors as well in the country at this point in time. He does need to work together in a bipartisan fashion with both Democrats and Republicans, because it seemingly is not just the House of Representatives which would be blocking his nominees, but in fact it is even Senate Republicans who don't agree with some of his nominees. It doesn't help, of course, and we didn't get to this in conversation, that there's been a very large turnover when it comes to the Trump administration. A lot of people are new, and there's this rotating door which is quite significant and is unprecedented for previous presidents as well at this sort of rate. So that's also an important factor in all this. And finally, we spoke about, of course, Trump's desire to open up the U.S. economy. That's understandable for any country around the world, because all presidents and leaders are dealing with that sort of challenge at this point in time, how to keep their citizens secure as well as keep their citizens fed. Both of the above are extremely important factors for any leader around the world at this time, and especially for the leader of the largest economy in the world, such as Donald Trump. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss an important topic which I feel doesn't get enough airtime in many mainstream media, and that is the issue of how migrants and refugees throughout the world really are suffering through this COVID-19 pandemic, and how exactly they are being treated in the respective host countries that they've found themselves in at this point in time. We're going to hone in on France and the UK to just give an example about how Europe is dealing with this issue. Now, certainly, Europe has been dealing with a refugee crisis for a number of years now, but this has just become a lot worse because of now this pandemic, the need for social distancing, closed down borders, etc. The challenges are immense for governments as well as for these human beings, as we tend to forget sometimes when we see these numbers that are suffering in those camps. We know that there are many in Calais, in France, for example, who want to get into the UK or even further into Germany and otherwise, who are stuck there right now. How they've been treated is, of course, up for discussion by French authorities. And then we also have refugees and migrants within the UK. Some of them who have found themselves homeless right now, even during this coronavirus pandemic. How are they being treated at this point in time on the streets of the UK? Do these governments have a plan of action in place right now? We know that Priti Patel in the UK has already said that she will not be taking in or will not be allowing for those children who have found themselves alone in many refugee camps, especially those camps, especially in Greece, and that the UK will not be taking some of those children, as have other European countries at this point in time, again, out of a humanitarian gesture, the need for these children to find some sort of safety, shelter, food, and protection, really, from otherwise dangers that they may face. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Catherine Guilyardi, who is a journalist and documentary maker. She specializes on migrations. She's joining us now from Paris. Joining us from London is Giorgia, Donà, who is a professor of forced migration and co-director of the Centre for Migration, Refugees and Belonging at the University of East London. And joining us also from the French capital is Liza Schuster, who has been working on European asylum policy for 30 years, especially in the UK, France, and Germany. And she's also been following events in North France since the year 2000. Liza, Giorgia, and Catherine, thank you to all three of you for your time today. Liza, let me start with you if I can. What do you make of the situation in Calais? Does the French government, do you think, have a plan for how to deal with those refugees, especially now in the context of COVID-19?
The issue of migrants in the north of France, but also remember there are encampments in Paris itself. They're not very high on the agenda. Those people are literally invisible because they tend to be in areas that are far from public sight. So the only reason that they are brought to the attention of the French government is by the numerous associations that try to support them, but which themselves meet resistance from, for example, the French police as well as local authorities.
Yeah, and I was just reading a report before coming on air about how, there was a distribution of water in one of these in Calais, I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken, and police came and one of those policemen tipped over that water. I mean, it doesn't seem like authorities really want these migrants / refugees even there. But even just on a humanitarian basis, I imagine they can be treated better at this time.
Expulsion from places where migrants are finding places to wait for their crossing the channel, that has been going on for years. So this hasn't stopped. Actually, this morning, two associations show that police has taken down tents and asked people who were there in Grand Sainte, which is near Calais, to go on buses and bring them, they say, in sheltering. They call it voluntary sheltering, but obviously the associations do not agree with that. And there has been some curfew. A curfew is put in place prohibiting association from intervening from 8 p.m. to 8:30 a.m., but they still have done it. Some associations claim that they were fined because they were not allowed to get out of confinement, even of lockdown, even if they say they need to go to places to bring in water, food, obviously. And the prefecture, who represents the state in the area, has opened hotels and centers, but they are far from Calais, and some migrants have been seen getting out of those camps or those centers or hotels to go back to Calais in order to try to cross the channel. So the measures do not really match what we're being asked to do here in France at the moment, which is to stay in lockdown and also to protect people. This doesn't, all associations say this is really absurd. And we also have those, what we call retention centers in France. And just yesterday, a tribunal has asked the government to finally close those retention centers. Their aim is to keep people while the French government is preparing their expulsion, their deportation to their own countries. But obviously at the moment, France, as any other country, cannot deport those people, so they are being asked or they are being kept in those centers for much too long, and some cases of COVID have actually been spotted in near Paris there. So as in Calais, actually, there are 5 migrants have so far, from what we know, been ill with coronavirus, and placed for three others have been placed in solitary confinement for to protect other people.
Okay. Giorgia, tell us the view from where you are and your vantage point there in the UK, because, it seems that, and I was reading, again, doing research for this show, and it seems that, when you go through the comment sections, and I know that's not the best way to take a poll of how the British people feel about migrants and refugees, but, a lot of them were just like, their point of view was that these are the migrants and refugees that made the decision to come, so they sort of have to live with the situation that they've found themselves in, even within this COVID-19 pandemic. Is that the feeling that you get? Is that where the public's viewpoint is? And then that obviously adds political pressure on a government then to act in kind?
I think that there are different responses. There is, at one level, a high degree of solidarity among charities and groups who want to help refugees in these difficult situations. And there are many activists who are advocating for changes in policies. However, as you pointed out, the response of the government, which has pretty much undergone 10 years of what has been described a hostile environment towards asylum seekers and refugees, means that they are highly vulnerable in this situation. You pointed out the many who are being made homeless. They have no recourse to public funds and find themselves really in a vulnerable situation. We also have many migrants and refugees who are occupying positions that are in the low economic scale. They are on 0-hour contracts, and they are the first one who've been affected by the economic slowdown. So they find themselves suddenly without a livelihood. We're also seeing that we have asylum seekers who are in detention with a higher risk of being infected, and many activists are calling for their early release. We also see a paradox, because while we've had many years of public discourses that have, one could say, demonized migrants, in the current environment, we can see that they are also a much higher risk of contracting COVID-19. They are becoming now the essential workforce of this country. They are the ones who are in care homes. They are the ones who are providing the food that we get in supermarkets. They are really driving the buses, cleaning our streets. And they are, therefore, the essential workforce that has been discriminated against. And they are the ones who are at higher risk of contracting COVID-19. And in fact, initial estimates indicate that BAME, British and Asian minority communities, ethnic communities in the UK, are at a higher risk of contracting 19. While they constitute 14% of the UK population, estimates indicate that 35% are being affected by COVID-19.
Yeah. Liza, I wonder if that's the same view there in France as well. Because, do you think there's an understanding that a lot of these migrants can possibly really be very effective members of even French society, even fulfilling those roles of essential workers as we now understand them within, this coronavirus pandemic?
I don't think it's quite as sharp as in the UK. The UK, it's been very, very clear, and there's a great deal of publicity about the extent to which the migrants who have been demonized for so long are now making a major contribution to all of the essential areas, as Giorgia pointed out. I don't think here in France that this recognition of the contribution that migrants and asylum seekers and refugees can make to the community, I don't think it's at the same level here. I think that by and large, people are still either in the threat or the victim categories at the moment, unfortunately.
Okay, so let's move on then, Catherine, because there's also then talk about what exactly happens once this entire pandemic is over, right? I mean, there will need to be questions asked, won't there, about, and I know that this has been a long-standing issue for Europe, certainly, but just international laws about how migrants and refugees are meant to be treated, firstly, and secondly, how their human rights were protected or not. I mean, do you think that there will be some accountability, that these governments, be it France, be it even the UK or anybody else already in Europe, will need to answer for this?
Well, I mean, for years, especially in the Calais area, there has been some reports by people who are involved in helping those who get there. There has been some reports about how human rights are not being respected, and that has been going on for years, as their shelters are being destroyed every day, as they do not have access to the necessary sanitary conditions, no water, no toilets, etc. So this crisis only stresses even more and reveals the insufficiency of the means that are put in place to protect these people, should it be in Paris, where you could see camps that now have been taken down, but while you're driving as a French person, I mean, they are here and they will go on coming. There is a double, I mean, the way people talk about it here is, as Giorgia was saying in the UK, I think there is a lot of solidarity from those who are already ready for this, and there is a lot of rejection from those who are ready for rejection. I mean, what is certain, as you were saying at the beginning of your program, is that this issue is not talked about much, that we don't talk about the migrants much on the news, as coronavirus is just everywhere. And when we hear about it in a positive tone, it's quite rare. We hear that some people who do not have papers, we're told, are now making some masks because they are sewers, and as some doctors and nurses actually are migrants and have also volunteered to help the health workers as migrants. So this is being publicized. But for the moment, our country is very inward and concentrated on the domestic problems, and that's, I think, will last, because this crisis will last and until there is a vaccine. So it might go on for a long time, and we've heard about death in the Mediterranean Sea, and even more than before, of course. It's difficult to know what's actually happening there. And here, associations and people involved are really worried that it will go on for long, that the fate of migrants will not be the priority here, even less.
Indeed. Giorgia, this goes back to then Europe, right? And I know that, of course, the UK right now is in a post-Brexit phase where, it's dealing with trying to come to a trade deal with the EU. But, it's still part of Europe, the continent as a whole, right? So do you think that European unity has been tested because of this refugee crisis in general, and now even more so? Because, again, we've had Priti Patel already in the UK saying, no, the UK is not going to take in even those stranded migrant children who find themselves alone right now, be it in camps in Greece or otherwise. That is just, it's sort of like, Europe's own moral authority almost now coming into question.
Yes, I actually think that the coronavirus crisis is showing that while there may be local level positive responses, at national level in the UK, there is still an intransigent, and the introduction of the point system a few months ago has meant that many of those who are now the essential workforce would not qualify for entry into this country. What is also paradoxical is that we just heard in the news that Romanian farmers are now being brought into the UK via charter flights to, in a way, pick up the fruits and the crops that are lying in the fields. So there are lots of paradoxes that will need to be addressed once the crisis is over. I also think that at European level, what is lacking, and more generally, I should say, at global level, while the pandemic is a global emergency, what is evident is that all the migrants and refugees who are in refugee camps across the world, who are congregated at borders of states, are pretty much considered an invisible population in this crisis. And global responses are not really coming on board. Each country in Europe is adopting its own responses. There isn't quite a coordinated response yet. And clearly, there isn't any attention paid, as is being pointed out, to all those who are in our places and our countries at the moment.
It's an important point, isn't it, Liza? Because I was just reading today as well about the fact that, as Giorgia there mentioned, even the UK is bringing in Eastern Europeans and others to work on their farms, as has, I believe, Spain and a few other European countries as well, who are having a hard time figuring out how exactly and who exactly will work on their respective farms. So on one hand, it's again paradoxical almost, right? As Giorgia there said, where the governments realize how important these sort of migrant workers and even seasonal workers may be, but on the other hand, then migrants in general are sort of rejected and not treated very well. What do you make of that?
This is a very long-standing paradox. Europe has depended on migrant labor for decades, if not for centuries. And what's interesting is Europe has always welcomed migrants as labor, but only as labor. They don't want the human being that goes with the labor. But I should say that it's still important to bear in mind that it's very difficult to weigh up, as I think Giorgia pointed out, exactly where the balance lies between those Europeans who do want to respect the rights of the migrants coming in and those who reject. But one of the real difficulties at the moment with the coronavirus is that many of those defenders of migrants, many of those people who either provide food for them or take them into their homes or accompany them to appointments are being confined at the moment, so they are unable to provide the support that they need. So it's not just that the people now in those camps are incredibly vulnerable to the disease, but they have lost the people who stand at their side. Not all of them, but it's a far reduced cohort of people who are defending their rights and trying to insist on those rights to government and authority.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. We'll leave that as our final thought. We appreciate both Liza and Catherine, who are joining us there from Paris, as well as Giorgia, who is speaking to us from London. We appreciate them sharing their expertise with us on this topic that as I said in my introduction, and as our guest also said, is not spoken enough about. Because again, these are human beings at the end of the day. They may be migrants, they may be refugees, they may be unwanted by some people within these respective European societies. But as I said, human beings who will also be affected, have already been affected by COVID-19, as Catherine there had mentioned, especially in Calais. There are some migrants who are already now being put into solitary confinement because they are suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic right now and virus. This can get a lot worse. This can explode really in the faces of these respective governments, these host countries who are not giving these people the proper facilities, sanitary facilities as well, to be able to take care of themselves, to be able to respect social distancing, etc. Their human rights need to be preserved in some fashion, because any hotspot within these countries means that there is a danger to the greater population as well, and to Europe and the rest of the world. We can't have hotspots anywhere in the world if we want to really defeat this pandemic as a global community. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.